Hello and welcome to Husch Blackwell's Labor Law Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Godar, and together with my Husch Blackwell colleagues and thought leaders from around the country, we will discuss and explore the ever-changing issues in the world of labor law. President Biden promised to be the most pro-union president ever, and he is fulfilling that promise. The next 4 years promises to be a wild ride, so buckle up and join us on the Labor Law Insider Podcast. Hello, it's great to have you join the Labor Law Insider for our first broadcast in February. And we're going to talk a little bit about a white paper that my colleagues and some consultants put together that was released just last month in January, titled Legal Insights for Manufacturing. For our manufacturing clients, and frankly for many, this is a pretty interesting work. It covers regulatory and compliance issues and supply chain issues. It looks deeply at product safety and liability and marketing, as well as all of the corporate transactions that we've seen and that we anticipate, whether they're M&A or otherwise, in 2023. It also talks about commercial contracting and looks at some of the data breach and security issues that so many of us are concerned about and taking steps for. But for our purposes today, an important section in which my guest, Anne Mayette, was one of the lead authors of, deals with unions, labor, and employment issues that are facing manufacturers and others in our economy. It's a really important discussion, and honestly, it tells us that some of our predictions from the Labor Law Insider over the past 15 or 18 months are coming true. But before we talk about those specifics, I want to introduce a new guest to the Labor Law Insider, Anne Mayette. Anne Mayette is a friend of mine. We've worked together on a number of cases over the years, and she practices out of our Husch Blackwell Chicago office. She's been practicing well more than a decade and hails from Michigan State and DePaul University, although Anne claims that much of her formative view of the world comes from being raised in New York with the statement that, no, Tom, I don't camp. Camping is when you don't have a pool at the hotel. And it's great to have you on board. And Anne is one of our Illinois super lawyers rising stars, and I know why she is because of all of the great work that we've done together. Welcome, Anne.
Well, thank you, Tom. It is great to be here with you today, and thank you for that amazing introduction. I think you've made me sound a lot more interesting than I am, but hopefully I'll live up to that today, and we can talk about some really interesting trends that we've been seeing that in the union space, in the labor space.
You know, it's great to include that for our manufacturing and other clients in the long document that we've authored. And one of the things that really impressed me as I looked at that and have talked to you is that this is more than blue sky. We're seeing some of the increased unionization efforts, not only among the healthcare employees that we talked about, about a year ago on the Labor Law Insider, and not in just places like Starbucks, but in manufacturing and transportation and warehousing as well. Give us a little bit of background as to what's going on in terms of unionization efforts in the manufacturing and related areas.
Yeah, Tom, like you said, the predictions that we've had on the Labor Law Insider over the past few, years have really seemed to be coming true, especially in the manufacturing, kind of transportation, warehousing industries. They saw a significant increase in union activity in both 2021 and 2022. Some of the kind of statistics that we're seeing in 2022, unions won more elections than the past 20 years. In fact, it was 80% more than 2021, and they were representing more than twice as many workers. In addition, there were a significant more petitions for future elections. They were up nearly 60% in the first 9 months of the year. And kind of doing my research and looking into the background on this, there was a recent Gallup survey that said 71% of Americans approve of unions, which is an all-time high since 1965, and up 64% since before the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are definitely seeing an increase in activity, an increase in Americans approving of union activity and unions. One of the most interesting resources that I found was the Cornell University Worker Institute Labor Action Tracker. It's quite the mouthful, but they did do an analysis of the union activity throughout the country, and you can really narrow it down to kind of the types of industries to see where you're really seeing a rise in activity. So within the manufacturing, transportation, and warehousing industries, there were 134 labor actions since January 1st, 2021, across 182 locations in the country. In addition, that the manufacturing industry made up 17.7% of work stoppages, and the transportation and warehousing industry made up 10.6% of work stoppages. And that was just in 2021. In 2022, the manufacturing industry saw 32 strikes in 41 locations and 16 labor protests in 17 locations. So you can see there, that's a significant amount of activity, a real increase, I think, from what we had been seeing before, and especially in that manufacturing, transportation, warehousing type industries.
Well, that's where I grew up, these many years ago. So much of the activity was related to manufacturing, transportation, warehousing, that sort of thing. And we know that even with all of that, unions don't represent a very significant portion of our private sector employees. It's somewhere 6 or 7%, something like that. But even with that, it tells us that there seems to be an energy around both labor actions as well as organizing actions in not only healthcare, but in the sort of bread and butter of transportation. So what are some of the demands from employees that have resulted in some of this increased activity, according to the review that you've done, Anne?
So not surprising, demands include a $15 minimum wage, especially over the last few years with COVID, some COVID-19 protocols, safety and health-related issues that are coming up, first contract, in addition, healthcare, job security, retirement and benefits. These are really some of the demands that we were seeing with these labor activity.
Well, and some of them may pale a little bit. I think it was just announced yesterday or today that the president is going to end the emergency call for based on the COVID pandemic. But some of them obviously will just continue unabated. It has little to do that there was a pandemic crisis, but it's talking about employee demands for what they would consider fair treatment in the workplace. What are the kinds of things that you're seeing that are driving employees either toward unionization or, if you will, staying with employers on a direct relationship without a third party?
So I think really the number one factor that we can kind of put a lot of these demands into is the want for the employees to feel engaged with their employer. And so wanting the employer to take the steps to engage their employees so that they feel like they have some buy-in, they have some say in how the company is operating. And really, I think this is an important thing to look at employee engagement from a really high level all the way down to kind of the nitty-gritty, because it doesn't just go to, keeping a union out of the workplace. It really is all about taking the steps you need to engage employees that are going to lead to a better workplace, whether unionized or not. I think it's really important because given the labor shortages we've seen in the past few years, finding ways to engage employees can actually lead to better employee retention and attracting the employees that you need because of all of these labor shortages. So there was recently a study that took place. It was actually in February and October of 2020 that they did structured interviews with leaders from 14 manufacturing companies, and then a follow-up employee survey with 578 employees. And kind of drivers of that employee retention were found to be enjoying the work they do, 83%. Job stability, that was 79% of responses. Family-oriented culture, 69% of respondents were looking for that. Also, jobs fitting well with other life demands, and then also training and career opportunities. So these are some of the things that employees were looking for in order to be engaged. And, this was creating a better workplace for both the employees and the employers, and leading to things that are going to benefit the employer as a whole.
It's not unusual to have conversations with our clients when we're trying to determine what the next year might bring. And I often raise whether they have annual evaluations, but more than that, whether they also have annual structured discussions about employee expectations, satisfaction, if you will, what they see their job track to be over the next 4 or 5 years, how they are understanding their role and how it meets their own lifestyle expectations. Do those kinds of structured and interviews seem to meet some of the issues that came about in this manufacturing engagement and retention study that you just referred to?
Yes, that's definitely something that led to kind of the things that have come out of this study, with employees kind of being able to voice and identify the things that were important to them, so that they could feel like they were had a voice within the company. So definitely the employer is taking the time and the effort to seek out those answers from their employees, engage them, and determine, what's most important to the employee. I think sometimes there is potentially a disconnect between what the employer thinks is important to the employee versus what is actually important to the employee. And so engaging in those, employee satisfaction and engagement surveys has really kind of opened employers' eyes to the different things that may be important to the employees.
And thanks so much for those observations. Hey, can we continue this discussion on some specific employee observations and employer responses in our next labor law podcast? I'd really like to have you join us and our listeners one more time. And thank you, listeners, for joining the Labor Law Insider podcast.